Why do people like horror movies? Like, seriously, it doesn't seem to make much sense. Nobody really likes to be scared. Some might say they do, but have you ever really enjoyed being followed down a dark street at night? Nobody feels happy when their significant other bursts out of the closet surprising them. And if an honest-to-goodness ghost ever appeared in front of you, the feeling of sheer terror you'd feel would not be a nice one. Fear is an inherently unpleasant emotion. So why do millions of horror junkies from around the world crave it? Why do so many go out of their way to experience fear, dread, and disgust? Growing up in the 2000s in the age of torture porn, I definitely did not get it. Watching someone get torn in two or dismembered did not sound like a good time to me. And when someone else said they did enjoy that sort of thing, it seemed kind of depraved. And as I grew older, I found my distaste for horror growing. Most horror films just weren't that scary, and if they were, I really did not want to watch. Why would I want to watch something that would give me nightmares? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And then one day I began to understand. I was watching Beauty and the Beast with my cousin, who couldn't have been older than 6 at the time. In the film, there's a scene where Belle wanders into the dark and dilapidated West Wing. The Beast catches her and grows furiously angry. My cousin shrunk back into the cushions of the couch and said, "Scary." I asked her if she wanted me to fast forward, and she responded, "No." And then again, "Scary." "Seriously, do you want me to fast forward?" She responded, "No." She was, oddly enough, kind of enjoying it. And suddenly, I remembered just how many of my favorite movies freaked me out as a kid. Watching the Iron Giant at 5 years old, hiding behind the couch as the giant turned into a giant weapon. Countless episodes of shows like Justice League, Batman, and Samurai Jack that freaked me out. And not to mention every single Disney movie that features moments intentionally meant to spook the kiddos in the theater. Walt Disney once said that kids like to be scared, and I guess I was one such kid. Cartoons that left me traumatized were also some of my favorites, the ones I kept coming back to. They felt dangerous, forbidden, in a word, exciting. Contrary to what I said before, we do actually enjoy being scared, just in controlled environments. Nobody would enjoy plunging off a building to their death, but they do enjoy wickedly sharp drops on a roller coaster. When we're scared, we feel a rush of adrenaline, and when removed from any real danger, that shot of adrenaline feels good. Watching horror films, we have danger synthesized into a nice, safe package where we can experience it without any risk of harm. And it's fun, again, like a roller coaster. And horror isn't the only genre that does this. It's the same reason that action movies and thrillers are so popular. Many might blanch at the idea of Jason Voorhees hacking people to death in Friday the 13th, but we don't seem to mind Luke Skywalker stabbing people with a lightsaber. James Bond, Indiana Jones, or John Wick have murdered far more people than your average horror film slasher, but in just less over-the-top ways. And yet, these genres accomplish similar results with similar methods. Excitement via violence. We get that same sort of adrenaline whether it's Jason Bourne outrunning the cops or a cheerleader outrunning Michael Myers. Horror applies more focus on the terror. It's the stronger dose, delving deeper into the things we are viscerally afraid of to give us a stronger dose of adrenaline. We crave danger, excitement, and risk. Horror simply provides a safe way to experience these things. And through this, horror can be fun. Growing up in the era of Saw, I thought most horror films were miserable affairs, only to grow older and realize that this often isn't the case. Oftentimes, horror can be hilarious, goofy, over-the-top, imaginative, in a word, fun. A lot of slasher movies are more gory Looney Tunes than visceral violent pornography. Let's take this scene from My Python and the Holy Grail as an example. The Black Knight keeps losing limbs, blood spurting from his wounds. And yet, despite this being objectively disgusting, we think it's hilarious because of just how over the top it is. We expect him to be on the ground howling in pain because that's how a real person reacts to being hurt, and yet he's jumping around still trying to pick a fight. A lot of horror holds the same appeal. As weird as it sounds, it can be funny to see simulated violence if it's done the right way with the right tone. Some of the best horror films are also amazing comedies. In fact, comedy and horror work in similar ways, with a setup, setup and a punchline. The only difference is the punchline on a horror film is supposed to elicit fear or disgust instead of, or sometimes as well as, humor. It's why comedians like Jordan Peele have done so well jumping from comedy to horror with films like Get Out and Us. Humor and horror work largely in the same way. Even bad horror films can still be fun to watch if it's over the top enough. But it's also more than that. Horror isn't merely the cinematic version of a roller coaster or a more gory slapstick routine. While horror provides us a way to experience fear and adrenaline in a safe environment, it also provides us a means by which to process the deeper, darker elements of life. Think about it this way. All cinema is simulated emotion, oftentimes negative emotions. Tearjerkers provide you a way to experience deep sadness without actually having to experience heartbreak. Action movies and thrillers give you simulated stress and anxiety without any real-world concerns. And on the flip side, romantic movies provide you the warm and fuzzies of love without any real investment in a relationship, and so on and so forth. Through these simulated emotions, we can explore and process various real-life issues and struggles. Thus, horror has long been a breeding ground for artists and audiences looking to process the most horrifying elements of life. In recent years, the term social horror has been coined, with films like Get Out and Us and A Promising Young Woman exploring taboo topics of race and gender through a more scary lens. However, I'd hazard to say there's never been horror that is not social horror. Throughout the genre's history, filmmakers have been using the genre as a means by which they can excise their greatest personal fears and darkest thoughts. For a more recent example, let's turn to Jordan Peele. As a biracial man, he often found himself the only person of color in a group of white people, a discomfort he translated into horror through Get Out. Ari Aster created Midsommar after breaking up with his girlfriend, and the slasher films of the 80s were largely seen as a reaction to the AIDS epidemic, an all-too-real monster personified by the likes of Jason, Freddy, and Michael Myers punishing those who would dare have premarital sex. The torture porn craze of the early 2000s is also seen by many as an internalization of a post-9/11 world where the threat of random acts of violence and war were hanging over the heads of a society that no longer felt safe. Heck, look back at the scary stories of ages past, with creepy bits of folklore being used to explain the presence of disease and death. And there are some taboos that are even too taboo for horror. Depictions of rape, or large-scale disasters, or genocide, while horrifying, are often only handled by serious dramas. And yet, horror indirectly provides a home for those wrestling with these things as well. Alien is deeply coded with imagery of rape and forced impregnation. Zombie films like Dawn of the Dead, 28 Days Later, and TV shows like The Walking Dead not only expose our fears of cannibalization and corpses, but also our fear of the darker aspects of people and our worst tendencies. Religion is seldom addressed in mainstream films, but in horror it has been thoroughly explored, highlighting the good, the bad, and the ugly of doubt and faith and hypocrisy and zealotry and everything in between. The supernatural can be wrestled with, concepts like demons and ghosts in the afterlife. Through horror, filmmakers can explore topics like race, gender, sex, pregnancy, children, family, failure, violence, death, politics, good, evil, faith, the paranormal, and everything else that people are too afraid to talk about. And in turn, audiences can grapple with these difficult things in the safety of a multiplex. In the same way someone might listen to sad music in order to relieve their own sadness, audiences can enjoy horror as a means of relieving their own fears. A friend who hates horror films once told me that she felt anyone could make a scary story because everyone has had a nightmare. And I think this is somewhat true, because life is dark and frightening, and sometimes we need an avenue through which we can process that darkness. Sometimes we need to watch a nightmare to properly process our own. And sometimes it's not that deep and it's just fun to watch buckets of blood get splashed around. So if you love horror and you have people in your life who just don't get it, maybe send them this video and maybe they'll come to appreciate it as much as I have. And also, happy Halloween.